The Nevada desert shimmered like a mirage as Zeke Hartwell dragged himself through the alkali dust, his right hand mangled beyond recognition, his surveyor's instruments scattered and broken behind him. Blood seeped through his makeshift bandage, leaving a crimson trail across the parched earth. The merciless sun beat down on his weathered face, deepening the lines etched by decades of outdoor work. At 54, the former territorial surveyor had mapped half the American West, established countless property lines, and spent 25 years bringing order to the chaos of westward expansion. But he'd never expected to be ambushed and mutilated by his own assistant, betrayed for the crime of refusing to falsify land surveys for corrupt speculators. "You're too damn honest for this business, old man." Jimmy Dalton had snarled as his hired thugs held Zeke down and smashed his drawing hand with a sledgehammer. The crack of bones had echoed across the empty landscape, followed by Zeke's agonized scream. "This territory's got no use for surveyors who can't tell the difference between accuracy and opportunity." Dalton had stood over him, his youthful face twisted with contempt. Once Zeke's promising apprentice, the young man had revealed himself to be nothing more than a greedy opportunist, willing to sell his integrity to the highest bidder. His expensive new suit and gold pocket watch spoke volumes about who was paying for his services now. The opportunity had been a scheme to redraw property lines around valuable water rights, stealing thousands of acres from small ranchers and homesteaders to benefit wealthy Eastern investors. When Zeke discovered the conspiracy and refused to participate, Dalton had decided that a tragic accident would solve his problem permanently. Should have stuck to drawing pretty maps instead of playing hero. Dalton had laughed as they left Zeke broken and bleeding in the middle of nowhere, taking his horse, supplies, and most of his water. "Maybe the coyotes will have better use for you than honest surveying ever did." Now Zeke stumbled through the sage and Joshua trees. His ruined hand cradled against his chest, his vision blurred from pain and dehydration. His throat burned with thirst, and each step sent waves of agony through his battered body. The vultures had begun circling overhead, patient predators waiting for him to collapse. He'd been walking for nearly 2 days, surviving on the meager contents of a canteen Dalton's men had overlooked in their haste to leave. In the distance, he spotted a weathered wooden building beside a natural spring, the first sign of civilization he'd seen since crawling away from Dalton's ambush. The sight gave him renewed strength, and he forced his leaden legs to keep moving. The building wavered in his vision, sometimes seeming to recede despite his desperate progress toward it. The way station sat at the junction of 2 freight roads, a place where teamsters and travelers could water their animals and rest before tackling the brutal crossing to California. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, the letters faded by sun and sandstorms. Several horses stood in a corral beside a small stable, and the smoke rising from the chimney promised human presence. Zeke pushed through the door and collapsed onto the rough wooden floor, his blood staining the worn planks. The cool interior was a blessed relief after the scorching heat outside. The scent of coffee and fresh bread filled his nostrils, a stark contrast to the dust and blood that had been his companions for days. "Mother of God," came a woman's voice, sharp with surprise and concern. Zeke looked up to see a woman in her mid-40s, her blonde hair streaked with premature gray, her blue eyes holding the wariness of someone who'd learned to expect trouble. She wore practical frontier clothes, a simple blouse and skirt covered by a leather apron, and moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to handling emergencies. A silver pendant in the shape of a hammer hung around her neck, a reminder of her Nordic heritage. This was Ingred, Inga Larson, though Zeke wouldn't learn her full story until later, a Norwegian immigrant who'd carved out her own kingdom in this desolate corner of Nevada, where the nearest law was 200 miles away, and survival depended on strength, cunning, and the willingness to help your neighbors. "What happened to you?" she asked, kneeling beside him to examine his injuries. Her accent was still noticeable, despite years in America, giving her words a musical quality that somehow made Zeke feel safer. "Ambushed," Zeke gasped through gritted teeth. "My assistant tried to kill me." Inga's pale eyes hardened as she took in the systematic nature of his injuries. This wasn't random violence, but deliberate torture designed to destroy his ability to work. Your own assistant did this to your hand? Caught him, falsifying surveys. Didn't like my interference. Bastard, Inga muttered in accented English, her Norwegian heritage showing through her anger. They tried to cripple you permanent. Ja? She helped him to a cot in the corner of the main room, her strong arm supporting his weight with surprising ease. A few teamsters sat at tables nearby, watching with the detached curiosity of men who'd seen plenty of violence, but weren't inclined to get involved. Water, Zeke croaked, his parched lips barely able to form the word. Inga brought him a tin cup filled with cool spring water, supporting his head as he drank. Slow now, she cautioned. Too much at once will make you sick. For 2 weeks, Zeke drifted between consciousness and fever, while Inga tended his wounds with the skill of someone who'd patched up plenty of injuries over the years. She cleaned his mangled hand with whiskey, set the bones as best she could, and applied poultices of herbs gathered from the surrounding desert. When infection set in, she fought it with a determination that matched Zeke's own will to survive. During his lucid moments, he learned that Inga ran the way station alone, having built it from nothing after her husband's death. She spoke little of her past, but the calluses on her hands and the quiet competence with which she managed everything from cooking to basic carpentry told their own story. She couldn't save his drawing hand. The bones were too badly shattered, but she managed to preserve enough function for him to grip simple tools. The fingers remained twisted and stiff, a permanent reminder of Dalton's betrayal. When Zeke finally sat up clear-headed, his fever broken and his strength slowly returning, he found Inga negotiating with a freight company, arranging supplies and schedules with the precision of someone who understood that survival in the desert required perfect logistics. Her way station was busier than he'd expected, not just teamsters and drifters, but families, merchants, even government officials who'd learned this was the most reliable stop between Reno and the California border. You run quite an operation, he observed, flexing his damaged hand and wincing at the limited movement. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the well-organized interior of the station. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with essential supplies, ammunition, preserved food, medicine, and tools. A large map of the territory hung behind the counter, marked with routes and water sources. I run the only honest business in 300 miles, Inga replied, checking items off a manifest. Her handwriting was neat and precise, reflecting an education unusual for a frontier woman. People know they get fair treatment here, whether they're buying supplies or information. The story emerged slowly over the following days as Zeke regained his strength. Inga had come west with her husband after crop failures destroyed their farm in Minnesota, seeking land and opportunity in the Nevada territory. They'd built a successful freight business until claim jumpers murdered her husband and tried to steal their water rights. Rather than flee, Inga had fought back with the ferocity of a cornered wolverine. Men think a foreign woman can't run a place like this, she explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. She organized her inventory with military precision, her strong hands moving with practiced efficiency. They learn different, or they don't learn at all. She didn't elaborate on how she'd taught those lessons, but the respect shown by even the roughest travelers who passed through spoke volumes. No one caused trouble at Inga's station, not if they wanted to travel these roads again. Zeke told her about Dalton's conspiracy, the falsified surveys, the years of honest work repaid with treachery. He described the complex web of corruption that reached from local land speculators all the way to territorial officials, all designed to steal water rights from legitimate settlers. Inga listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as if she'd heard similar stories before. Her blue eyes narrowed when he described how Dalton had systematically destroyed his drawing hand, targeting the very tool that made him valuable as a surveyor. "This Jimmy Dalton," she said finally, pouring them both cups of strong coffee. "He thinks being young and ruthless makes him smart? He thinks I'm finished, useless without my drawing hand." Zeke stared at his twisted fingers, trying to suppress the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. His entire identity had been built around his skill with maps and measurements. "Maybe he's right about one thing," Inga said, her tone thoughtful rather than pitying. "Maybe the old way of doing things is finished. Question is, what are you going to build to replace it?" The question hung between them, challenging Zeke to look beyond his loss toward possibility. It was the first time anyone had suggested he might still have value, might still contribute something meaningful despite his injury. Their partnership began almost accidentally when a dispute arose over water rights between two freight companies, threatening to shut down the vital supply route that kept Inga's business alive. The argument had escalated to drawn guns when Zeke intervened, his quiet authority and detailed knowledge of territorial water law diffusing the tension. Using his left hand to draw a rough map in the dust, he showed both parties how they could share the contested spring without compromising either operation. His knowledge of surveying and property law, combined with his reputation for honesty, allowed them to mediate a solution that satisfied both parties. "You still know your business," Inga observed as they watched the freight wagons roll out peacefully instead of at gunpoint. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, and a cool breeze brought relief from the day's heat. "Know the law, know the land, know how to read the signs when boundaries are wrong," Zeke replied, awkwardly gripping a pencil with his damaged hand. He'd been practicing writing with his left hand, the letters shaky but legible. "Out here, that's still worth something." Word spread through the Nevada territory about the way station at Scorpion Flats, where Inga Larson and the Crippled surveyor could resolve property disputes that had stumped territorial courts for years. Ranchers, miners, and homesteaders began making the journey specifically to seek their counsel, bringing maps and deeds for Zeke to examine. They developed a reputation for fairness that extended from the Sierra Nevada to the Colorado River. Inga's practical knowledge of frontier life complemented Zeke's technical expertise, creating solutions that worked in the real world rather than just on paper. More importantly, they found in each other something they'd both thought lost: companionship, respect, and the slow-burning warmth of mature love, built on shared struggles and mutual understanding. Neither spoke of it directly, but their growing closeness was evident in small gestures: Inga's hand lingering on Zeke's shoulder, his smile when she entered a room. The confrontation with Jimmy Dalton came 10 months later on a crisp autumn morning. He arrived with a territorial land commissioner and forged documents claiming Zeke was mentally incompetent due to his injuries and needed to be placed under Dalton's care as his former business partner. The young man had grown even more prosperous in the intervening months, his expensive Eastern clothes and gold watch marking him as someone who'd risen far above his station. "There's the old cripple," Dalton announced, pointing at his former mentor with a silver-headed cane. "Living in sin with some foreign woman, probably doesn't even remember how to read a compass anymore." Zeke stepped out of the way station, no longer the broken man Dalton had left for dead. Hard work and purpose had strengthened his body, while finding his true calling had restored his spirit. His right hand was twisted and scarred, but his left had grown strong enough to handle most tasks. His eyes, once clouded with pain and fever, now held a steady determination. "Jimmy," he said calmly, "you're looking prosperous. The fraud business treating you well?" "Don't get smart with me, old man. I'm here on official territorial business." Dalton waved a document bearing an official seal. "You're coming with me to Carson City for evaluation. Can't have a madman giving advice on property matters. Official?" Inga stepped out beside Zeke, a shotgun cradled in her arms. The morning sun glinted off her silver pendant and highlighted the steel in her eyes. "Funny thing about that. I sent some letters to friends in Carson City and Sacramento. Seems the territorial government's been looking for you for quite some time." Dalton's confidence wavered as he realized they'd been building a case against him for months. Inga's connections throughout the freight industry had provided access to records and witnesses that painted a clear picture of systematic land fraud. The land commissioner beside him shifted nervously, suddenly aware he might be implicated in something bigger than expected. "This is a setup." Dalton sputtered, his hand moving toward his gun. The teamsters who'd been loading supplies nearby suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere, recognizing the signs of impending violence. "No," came a new voice from behind them. "This is justice." A federal marshal rode up to the way station, flanked by territorial investigators and several angry ranchers who'd lost their land to Dalton's fraudulent surveys. They'd been tracking the conspiracy for over a year, following a trail of forged documents and stolen water rights across 3 territories. The confrontation ended without gunfire. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a dozen witnesses, Dalton broke down and confessed to everything, hoping for leniency that never came. The land commissioner proved to be nothing more than a paid actor with no official standing. Both men were taken into custody, along with detailed records of their conspiracy. Dalton died in territorial prison 2 years later, still claiming he'd only been trying to help develop the territory. His Eastern backers disavowed any knowledge of his methods, though several found themselves facing uncomfortable questions about their investments. "Feel better?" Inga asked as they watched the marshal's party disappear toward the horizon, taking Dalton to face justice. The desert stretched before them, harsh but beautiful in its stark simplicity. "Feel useful," Zeke replied, flexing his damaged hand. The twisted fingers would never again hold a drafting pen with the precision he'd once commanded, but they could still point the way toward justice. "For the first time since they crippled me, I feel like I'm making a difference." Their partnership deepened into something more profound than business or convenience. They expanded the way station into a proper settlement that served the entire region, providing not just supplies and shelter, but mediation services for the complex property disputes that plagued the growing territory. Zeke taught classes in basic surveying to young settlers, passing on his knowledge to a new generation. Inga established a small library with books ordered from San Francisco, determined that isolation wouldn't mean ignorance. Together, they created a place where the rule of law existed, not through force, but through mutual respect and fair dealing. "We make quite a team," Inga observed one evening as they sat by their spring, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in brilliant purples and golds. The water reflected the colors, creating a double sunset of breathtaking beauty. "We make a home," Zeke corrected, taking her calloused hand in his scarred one. "The kind that's built on trust rather than convenience, on partnership rather than dependence." At 55, Ezekiel Hartwell was no longer the broken-down surveyor who'd been beaten and left for dead by a corrupt assistant. He was a mediator, a protector, and living proof that expertise was more valuable than physical perfection when integrity was at stake. The desert that had nearly claimed his life had instead given him purpose, partnership, and the chance to use his knowledge for something greater than mere map-making. And Ingrid Larson had found something she'd thought lost when her husband died. Not just love, but belonging with someone who saw her foreign heritage as strength rather than weakness, who understood that building something lasting required both practical skills and the courage to stand up for what was right. Together, they'd carved out their own piece of the American dream in the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert, proving that sometimes the people society discards become the ones who build the most enduring communities. Their way station became a landmark on the frontier, Scorpion Flat Station, where honest dealing and fair arbitration went hand in hand with coffee, supplies, and a moment's rest from the brutal journey west. The freight road still ran past their door, carrying goods and dreams across the expanding West. But now they carried something else as well. The knowledge that there were still places where accuracy mattered more than profit, where foreign accents were welcomed rather than feared, and where two people who'd been written off by the world proved that the strongest partnerships are forged in the crucible of shared adversity and mutual respect.